My name is Margaret Rowe, and I live in a house that remembers more than most people do. It's nothing fancy. A simple timber frame farmhouse sitting on 15 acres of land in the green stretches of Sparta, Wisconsin. Apple trees line the eastern fence. A barn leans softly westward with time, and there's an old bell near the chicken coop that hasn't rung in decades. My husband, Walter, and I bought this land back in 1982. With money we didn't really have, but faith we absolutely did. He died young, a tractor accident, when our son Brian was just 6. Since then, it's been me and the land, raising a boy, tending the soil, and holding it all together with duct tape, God, and stubborn hope. For over 40 years, I worked this place with my hands. I planted trees with fingers blistered raw, fixed fences in the middle of storms, and learned how to stretch dollars into meals, into school shoes, into birthday cakes. I never complained, not because life was easy, but because I believed some things were worth doing quietly, worth doing for family. Brian was my reason. Every parent says that, I know, but when you lose your partner before the life you built with them even has a chance to grow old, your child becomes everything. I remember sewing his Halloween costumes by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. I stayed up late making him dinosaur pancakes before school, read him the Boxcar Children under flashlight when the power went out during winters, and left the porch light on even after he moved to Madison for college, just in case he came home late one night needing warmth. He was a sweet boy, bright, kind, always helping me carry feed bags or picking apples off the high branches for canning season. He used to say, "I want to live here forever, Mom." I believed him. Years passed. He got a job in the city, then met Allison. She was charming, that kind of pretty where you're not sure if it's real or rehearsed. They came to visit the summer before the wedding, hand in hand, him glowing, her curious. I remember how she walked through the house with those city shoes that clacked against my worn hardwood floors. She said everything sweet, how cozy the house was, how peaceful the fields looked, how she loved the smell of apple blossoms. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. Brian looked so proud bringing her here. And me? I was just grateful he hadn't forgotten this place still mattered. When they got engaged, I went into full motion, scrubbed every window, painted the porch, repaired the barn roof, even though my knees screamed the whole time. I offered to host the reception right here on the land. We hung fairy lights in the big oak trees and set up tables across the pasture. It was simple, but beautiful. Allison hugged me that day and whispered, "You've raised such a strong man. Thank you." I cried quietly in the kitchen later that night while folding napkins. For a brief moment, I thought I had done it. I had raised a good man, and in return, I would be part of something whole again. They got married in June. The sky stayed clear that day, like the clouds themselves didn't want to intrude. I wore the pearl earrings Walter gave me for our 5th anniversary and smiled in every photo. I made Allison's favorite lemon bars for the dessert table even though I had never baked them before. She laughed, touched my shoulder and said, "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." I smiled and replied, "It wasn't trouble. It was joy." She moved in with Brian for a week after the wedding just to reset before their honeymoon in Oregon. I made up the guest room, laid fresh towels, even left a little vase of daisies on the nightstand. I'd waited so long to have a daughter in this house. One evening, after dinner, she brought over wine. We sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the western ridge. She said she wanted to learn more about the land. I talked for hours about frost patterns, the best planting months, how the deer used to eat my tomatoes before I learned to plant garlic around the beds. She smiled and listened, or so I thought. Later that night, I caught her walking around the property line with her phone flashlight. She said she couldn't sleep and just loved the way moonlight hit the fields. I told myself not to overthink it. She was curious. Young people are different. The next morning, I found her thumbing through my old county property documents I kept in a binder near the phone. She said she was just fascinated by rural zoning laws and how people hang on to so much land they don't really use. I chuckled nervously and told her, "Well, it's not just land to me, it's life." She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I started feeling off, like something behind the curtains wasn't quite right, but I pushed it down because I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. I told myself it was nerves, post-wedding adrenaline. Maybe she was just trying to fit in. That Friday, Brian sat with me in the kitchen. We were shelling peas like old times. He said, "Allison really loves this place, Mom. She thinks it has so much potential." I smiled. "That's good to hear." He paused, looked out the window, and added, "She just worries it might be a bit much for you to handle now." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He shifted. "Well, it's a lot of land for one person. And with your hip bothering you, maybe we start thinking about options." Options. That word echoed in my head for hours after he left. That night, I sat alone with a cup of tea, watching the porch light flicker. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, because in my bones, I knew something was beginning. Something that looked like family on the surface, but smelled like strategy underneath. It's strange. When you give your whole life to someone, you think they'll remember. You think the apple pies, the bandaged knees, the nights working double shifts so they can go to college. You think that stuff matters. You think it earns you a place at the table forever. But sometimes all it earns you is a target on your porch. That was the beginning of my revenge story, and I didn't even know it yet. It started with a flyer. A thin, glossy postcard slipped under my front door one afternoon while I was out checking the irrigation lines. When I picked it up, I thought it was another pizza coupon or maybe something from the local farmers co-op. But no, it was an advertisement, slick, professional, offering cash incentives for rural landowners willing to transform underutilized farmland into income-generating vacation properties. I stared at it, confused, until I turned it over. At the bottom was a handwritten note in bright blue ink. "Thought this might interest you. A. Allison." I folded the flyer in half and didn't say a word. That evening, they joined me for dinner. Allison had brought one of her kale and couscous salads. Bless her heart, no one asked for it, and Brian grilled steaks. It was a warm night, and the windows were cracked just enough for the scent of cut grass to drift in. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like a script. They sat across from me at the old pine table, Allison's nails clicking lightly against her glass as she leaned forward with that rehearsed sweetness. "We've been thinking, Margaret," she began. "This place is beautiful, like stunning, but it's just so big for one person." I didn't say anything. Brian chimed in nervously. "We're just worried, Mom. 15 acres is a lot. All that upkeep, your knees, the fencing. You deserve something easier." "I'm not asking for easier," I said quietly. "But what if you didn't have to ask?" Allison said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "We've looked into some things. There's this wonderful retirement community closer to the city with medical access and community dinners. You'd have friends, support." "I have land," I interrupted, "and memory. That's enough." Brian glanced at her, then back at me. "We could help you sell a few parcels, just 5 acres maybe. Keep the house. Use the money to set you up comfortably." I knew that tone. The one people use when they're trying to sound helpful but have already made the decision for you. I set my fork down. "And who suggested that?" Brian hesitated. "We talked about it." "We," I repeated. Allison jumped in. "We're only bringing it up because we care. We want to build a future, and with real estate being what it is, we thought maybe part of the land could help us all. A small cabin project, ecotourism. You'd still live here, of course, just less of it." Less. That word sank deeper than I expected. I looked out the window where the pasture rolled golden in the fading light. Walter and I planted hay there the summer Brian turned 8. He'd fallen asleep in the truck bed that year, covered in dirt and laughter. That field wasn't just land. It was us. It was him. The rest of dinner passed in silence. I smiled, nodded, cleared plates, let them think the conversation had ended. But that night I stayed up, and I listened. From the guest room, I heard them talking, soft but not soft enough. She's attached, obviously," Allison whispered, "but we need to move on this while the market's hot. Once we get her to sign the right forms, we can split it and develop phase 1 by spring." Brian replied something I couldn't hear. She said, a little louder, "Come on, she'll go along. She always does. She won't fight us." I stood in the hallway still, with one hand on the stair rail and the other clenched around a dish towel I hadn't realized I'd brought with me. They weren't helping me. They were plotting around me. And what struck me hardest wasn't even Allison's confidence. It was Brian's silence. He didn't stop her. He didn't say my name like it mattered. He just let her talk about my land, my home, my life, as if I were a character written out of the will before I even died. That was the first moment I realized I might not be part of their future plans at all. Just a placeholder, a hurdle. I know this might sound familiar to some of you watching. Tell me honestly, have you ever been talked about like you weren't even in the room? Like your history, your memories, your sacrifices were nothing more than a spreadsheet in someone else's plan? Because that night, I stopped being a mother in their eyes. I became a signature waiting to be collected. The next morning, Allison made coffee and cheerily asked if I still had the original land plat map. "Just curious," she said, brushing crumbs off her phone screen. I smiled. "It's somewhere," I lied. That afternoon, Brian offered to take a look at the shed, but instead wandered into the back room, where I kept my file cabinet. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. Later that week, I got a call from Donna, my oldest friend from the co-op. "Hey, Marge," she said. "Funny thing, someone called asking about zoning rules on your land, said they were helping you simplify your estate. Was that you?" It wasn't, but it told me everything I needed to know. They weren't waiting for my permission. They were already moving forward, trying to get ahead of me, treating me like a dying tree in the middle of a future development. Something to cut down and build over. I wish I could say I confronted them right then and there, but I didn't. Because by the time I understood what was happening, I also understood something else. They believed I wouldn't fight. They thought I was soft, quiet, out of touch. They thought I'd go gently if they spoke gently. They were wrong, because I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. I was watching. And what they didn't know, what they never bothered to consider, is that a woman who builds a life out of nothing knows how to protect what's hers, even in silence, even when no one's watching. Especially then. I didn't cry when I heard Allison whisper through the walls. I didn't even flinch. There's a strange kind of stillness that happens when you realize the people you love are capable of making plans without you in them. Not just thoughtless plans, but ones that require you to disappear quietly, preferably with a smile. That's where I stood that night, outside the guest room door, holding a folded dish towel and listening to Allison say the words, "It's just sitting there." She meant my land, the life I built, the place I raised my son, just sitting there. Do you know what a place like that would go for if we split it right? We could flip, invest, maybe build something more modern. There was a pause. I couldn't hear Brian's reply. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe silence was all he had to offer. I stood there so long that my legs started to ache, but it wasn't my body that hurt. It was something deeper, something I hadn't felt since the first night I came home after Walter died and found our old house shoes sitting by the door like he'd be back any minute. That same hollowness, the quiet confirmation that you're alone now. The next morning, I made everyone breakfast. Bacon, biscuits, eggs, the works. Allison complimented my jam. Brian asked if we could take a walk later just to chat. I smiled. I smiled through all of it. They thought I hadn't heard. They thought I didn't see. Later that afternoon, I watched Allison stroll the edge of the apple grove with her phone out, pretending to take pictures of the blossoms. But I knew better. She was mapping it. She was measuring what she thought would soon be hers. That night, I sat by the window, sipping tea that had gone cold. The porch light was off. I didn't bother turning it on. Something inside me had already dimmed. I thought about Walter, about the way he'd squeeze my hand 3 times during hard days, our silent code for I love you, about how he always said this land was the one good decision he never questioned. "We'll grow old here," he used to say. We'll let the trees watch us wrinkle. And I thought about Brian, the boy who used to run barefoot through the pasture. The boy who once told me, when I grow up, I'm going to build a cabin right here and live next to you forever. Now he was helping his wife evict me, with legal loopholes and fake compassion. They hadn't said the words yet, but I knew they were coming. A week later, I ran into Ruth, Allison's cousin, at the local farmer's market. She was balancing a tote bag full of arugula and fancy cheese when she waved me down. "Aunt Margaret, I heard the big news," she said. I blinked. "What news, dear?" "Oh, the land. Allison said you were finally downsizing. Something about a great offer already lined up. Honestly, I'm surprised how fast it happened. People are really talking about it." My jaw clenched, but I smiled. "Is that so?" "Yeah, smart move. It's a lot for someone your age to manage, right?" "Oh, did you find a new place already? Somewhere with an elevator, I hope. These old houses are rough on the knees." She patted my shoulder and breezed off toward the bread stall, leaving me in the middle of the market, holding a half-pound of radishes and a full heart of fury. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my truck for over an hour, staring through the windshield like the fog would give me answers. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding. Allison had already started talking like it was done, like my decision didn't matter, like I was a formality. That evening, I called Donna from the co-op, told her everything. She didn't gasp, she didn't interrupt, she just said, "Marge, you need to talk to someone who knows how to dig quietly." That's when she gave me a name, Reuben Myers. Used to be a county sheriff. Now he ran a bait shop and occasionally found things out for people who didn't want to be blindsided. I met him the next day, down by the lake. He wore a fishing vest and had a thermos of something that smelled like coffee but tasted like history. I told him everything, every glance, every whisper, every gut feeling I had. He nodded through all of it. When I finished, he scratched something on a yellow legal pad. "You want it loud or quiet?" he asked. "Quiet," I said, "very." "Give me a week," he replied. When I got home, I walked through my house like a stranger, touched the old banister that Brian once slid down and dented, opened the drawer that still held his baby teeth in an envelope marked "First Lost," looked at the faded family photos Allison had once asked to digitize for the wedding slideshow. She didn't want memories. She wanted the deed. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened the cedar chest in the guest room. Inside was my wedding photo, Walter's dog tags, and the manila folder with the original property deed, my name in black ink, sole owner. No co-signers, no liens, no permission granted to anyone. I held it like a shield, not because I needed to remind myself what I owned, but because I needed to remember who I was, not a placeholder, not an obstacle, a woman who had survived too many winters to be pushed out in spring. So I made a plan. I contacted my attorney, Martha, the one who helped me settle Walter's estate. We met the next morning. I brought the deed. She brought the kind of quiet rage only older women carry, the kind forged from years of being overlooked. "This is fraud," she said, flipping through a copy of the forged power of attorney I'd pulled from Allison's files when she left her laptop open. "They're bluffing, but if they submit any of this, it's criminal." "What can we do?" I asked. She smiled. "Everything." We updated my will. We reviewed the trust documents, we added clauses, we layered protections. We drew up an airtight plan that would make even the greediest real estate agent think twice before sniffing around my land again. Then she looked at me and asked, "Do you know who you want to leave this to?" I sat back, breathed deep, and said, "No one." She blinked. "I want to give it away," I said, "but not to them, not to anyone they can touch." That was the moment I stopped being afraid of losing something, because I had already lost the one thing that mattered most, the illusion that love protects you. It doesn't. Only preparation does. The first time I felt peace in weeks was in the waiting room of Martha Kessler's law office. It wasn't because the coffee was good. It wasn't. It was burnt and bitter and came out of a machine older than my barn roof. It wasn't the air conditioning either. It barely worked and made a humming noise like a sick tractor. No, it was because for the first time since I overheard my own son plan my exit, I was somewhere I could reclaim what was mine. Martha had helped me settle Walter's estate 30 years ago. She had a voice like gravel and always wore a navy cardigan no matter the weather. When she greeted me that day, she gave me the kind of hug older women reserve only for those who've survived more than they ever talked about. She didn't ask why I was there. She just said, "You ready?" I nodded. We sat in her office, papers spread across the oak desk. Walter and I helped her move into this building back in '94. I handed her everything. The original deed, copies of the forged power of attorney Allison had apparently created using a downloaded template and some ballpoint arrogance, and the name of the notary they tried to schedule. Martha flipped through the paperwork slowly, her jaw set. "This is fraud," she said, matter of fact, and stupid, frankly. If she submitted this, she opened herself up to real consequences. "But they haven't filed it yet," I said. "Doesn't matter. The attempt is enough, and you've got proof." I looked at the manila folder in her hand. That piece of paper was supposed to give Allison control of everything I'd built. But in the right hands, in Martha's hands, it became a weapon. Not for revenge, for protection. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "I want to make it so they can never touch this house. Not now, not after I'm gone, not even by accident." She smiled, not warmly, but the way someone does when they know a war is winnable. "We'll need a trust. 2, actually. 1 for the land, 1 for the rest of your estate." "I want the land first," I said. "That's where their eyes are." We spent 2 hours going over everything. We updated my will, rewrote the living trust, added clauses that would send chills through any lawyer worth their retainer. We inserted language to block any sale, transfer, or inheritance unless under court supervision. It was ironclad. Then came the real part. "The question is," Martha said, tapping her pen, "do you want someone to inherit this, or do you want to lock it down forever?" I paused. For most of my life, I would have said, "Of course I want Brian to have it," even after Walter died. Even after all the scraped knees and mortgage notices and sleepless nights waiting for Brian to come home from high school parties, I believed that love, eventually, would be enough. But love, I was learning, doesn't always come back around. Sometimes it detours. Sometimes it chooses someone else's last name over your first embrace. I took a deep breath. "I want to give it to the land itself," I said. Martha raised an eyebrow. "I want to donate the entire property to the Sparta Land Conservation Trust. I've already looked into it. They accept historical farms with long-standing ecological value. The house, the fields, the barn, all of it. It becomes untouchable. No resale, no development, just preserved." Martha nodded slowly. "You're sure?" "I am," I said. "I'm not giving it away out of spite. I'm saving it." She flipped her notebook open. "Let's begin." That afternoon, I drove straight to the bank, opened a private safe deposit box, brought with me the new trust paperwork, copies of the deed, birth certificates, insurance, and a sealed letter addressed to the Sparta Land Conservation Board. I locked it all away and left feeling 10 pounds lighter. When I got home, the house was quiet, but not empty. I walked into the guest room. Brian's suitcase was still there, Allison's cardigan draped over the chair. They weren't just staying here, they were nesting, making plans, and I had let them. Not anymore. That night, I did something small but important. I took down the old family photo that hung above the fireplace, the one of Brian and me on the porch swing when he was 10, missing his front teeth and laughing like the world was wide open. I replaced it with a mirror. It wasn't symbolic. It was survival. I needed to see myself again, because I was beginning to forget the woman I used to be, the one who rebuilt a roof in the rain, who sold jam at the farmer's market just to buy her son new cleats. Keys, who spent 40 years loving a piece of land so deeply it became her second heartbeat. I wasn't weak, I wasn't confused, and I sure as hell wasn't done. Ruben, my investigator, called me the next morning. "I've got something," he said. "Your daughter-in-law made a few calls she shouldn't have. Didn't hang up properly. Bluetooth caught it all." He handed me a flash drive in a bait shop parking lot like we were exchanging state secrets. At home, I slid the drive into my laptop. Allison's voice came through the speakers, unfiltered, slick with confidence. She's so clueless. Still talking about apple pies and photo albums? Flip that house the second she signs. Matthew's already looking at listings. There was laughter. Then a second voice I didn't recognize. Then Allison again. She won't fight. She thinks being quiet makes her safe. It makes her easy. I sat still for a long time. Not sad, not shocked. Just clear. That was the line. That was the moment. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had erased me. And I was done letting them. That night, I made a second copy of the audio. One for the lawyer, one for the bank. One I burned onto a CD and labeled, in thick black Sharpie, if they ever deny it. Then I lit a candle, not for comfort, for clarity, because from this point on, I wasn't their obstacle. I was their lesson. They thought I would fold. That's the part that still surprises me. Not that they tried to take everything, but that they thought I'd just hand it over. That I'd go along quietly, signing papers I didn't understand, making their path smooth while they bulldozed everything I built. But I'd already signed something, just not what they expected. The papers transferring the property into the Sparta Land Conservation Trust were processed on a Tuesday morning, filed quietly with the county registrar by Martha's assistant. No headlines, no phone calls, no confrontation, just a single stamp from a clerk who didn't know he was sealing 40 years of sweat and sacrifice into legal stone. By the time Brian and Allison returned with their notary, the house wasn't mine anymore, not in the way they hoped. They arrived on a Thursday, late afternoon. Allison wore heels like she was headed to brunch, and Brian had that tight-lipped look of someone pretending everything was normal. The notary, a man I didn't recognize, stood on the porch holding a clipboard and an overstuffed manila envelope. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "We brought everything," Allison chirped. "Thought it'd be smoother this way. Just need your signature and then we can start the paperwork for phase 1. I stared at her. Then I looked past her, down the gravel driveway where my mailbox still leaned slightly right. Walter never did fix that post. I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned and walked to the kitchen. Let them stand there. I put on a kettle, took out my favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle and fading blue flowers. I let the water boil and settle, slow and deliberate, like the rhythm of my own breath. When I returned, I was holding a single sealed envelope. I handed it to Allison. "What's this?" she asked, confused. "A copy of the recorded trust documents," I said. "This house is no longer mine." Her smile flickered. "What?" "It belongs to the land now," I said. "Permanently, legally, irrevocably." She opened the envelope, pulled out the paperwork, eyes scanning faster with each second. This isn't valid. You didn't even talk to us about this." "I didn't need to," I said. Brian finally spoke. "Mom, come on. You didn't even mention you were thinking about this. Why would you go behind our backs?" I stared at him. "Behind your backs? You mean like filing a forged power of attorney? Like telling your cousin I'd already agreed to sell? Like walking my land at night? Mapping out where to put cabins?" His mouth opened, then shut again. "You thought I wouldn't notice," I said, "but I've been noticing for a long time." Allison's voice turned sharp. "So you're just throwing us out? Like we don't matter?" "No," I said calmly. "You threw yourselves out the moment you decided I was in the way." The notary took a quiet step back and folded his clipboard shut. Smart man. Brian stood frozen. "This house, this land, it's not just dirt and boards," I continued. "It's the graveyard of every decision I made to keep you safe. It's where I held your father's hand when he was dying, where I taught you how to tie your shoes, where I buried the dog you cried for 2 nights over. And you looked at all that and saw a flip opportunity." Allison took a breath to respond, but I raised my hand slightly. "I'm done talking." She tried again, louder this time. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "You will." Then I closed the door, locked it, sat at my table with my tea, and listened to the sound of their car tires crunching the gravel as they left. I didn't feel triumph. I felt space, like a room inside me that had been crowded with doubt and pain had finally been cleared out, like I could breathe in my own home again without wondering what was being planned behind my back. Over the next week, I made changes, small ones. I changed the locks. A friend from the hardware store did it for me in exchange for apple butter and a jar of pickled beets. I organized the pantry, cleaned the attic, donated old curtains and unused furniture. I made space, not for guests, but for peace. I also started attending Thursday tea at the community center. It was mostly widows, 2 retired school librarians, and a former Army nurse who never used a coaster. At first, we just chatted about the usual things: aching joints, which grocery store had the good strawberries that week, the new pastor's terrible singing voice. But slowly, stories came out. One woman, Judith, said her niece tried to have her declared incompetent so she could sell her house before she'd even finished treatment for a knee replacement. Another, Shirley, explained how she buried her family trust documents in 3 separate safe locations after her son's 3rd divorce. They all had scars shaped like signatures. I told my story in pieces. No drama, just the facts. They nodded, never shocked. "We call it inheritance ambush," Shirley said one afternoon, stirring sugar into her tea. "Happens every day. They don't want to care for us. They want what we built." Judith leaned in. "Make it cold, honey. Put in your will that if they contest anything, they lose everything." I nodded. They weren't just pouring tea. They were passing down wisdom, the kind that doesn't make it into law books or TV interviews, the kind you only learn when you've been betrayed by the very people who once asked you for lunch money and rides to soccer practice. I started writing things down, updating documents, labeling folders, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I was awake, fully, finally. I invited my niece Claire over the next weekend. She's in nursing school, always wears cardigans too big for her, and still asks me if I'm sleeping okay even when I say I'm fine. We boxed up the Christmas decorations and cleaned out the old pie safe. I showed her where I kept the updated will, the trust paperwork, the keys to the deposit box. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and said, "I've got you." And I believed her. Because she didn't ask what I had. She asked how I was. That night, I made a fire, wrapped myself in Walter's old quilt, and looked out across the orchard. The moonlight caught the apple trees just right, their branches bare but strong, waiting, healing. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I was doing the same. They didn't come back for 2 weeks. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message, that maybe, just maybe, silence had done what shouting never could, draw a line too deep to cross. But then, one afternoon, I saw his truck again, Brian, alone this time. He parked in the same spot he used to pull into after school, when he'd barrel through the door asking what was for dinner. Now, he just stood outside, staring up at the porch like it belonged to someone else. I opened the door but didn't step out. He didn't knock, just looked at me with that tired, almost boyish face. "Mom," he said, voice rough, "I'm sorry." I didn't answer right away. "I didn't know she was doing all of it," he added quickly. "Not like that." "But you let her, I said. He flinched, and I didn't feel satisfaction, just truth settling between us like dust. "She said you were never going to use the land anyway," he continued, "that it would be better off working for us. I didn't think you'd fight it." I nodded once. "You were right about one thing. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to finish." He looked confused. I pointed to the trees. "That's where your dad and I planted our first batch. That land out there, it fed this house for decades, and I would have left it to you gladly if you had just remembered where you came from. But you didn't. You looked at this place and saw a price tag." He looked away, jaw tight. "She's gone." "I know," I said. "She left when the plan fell through, didn't she?" He didn't deny it. "I came to ask," he hesitated, "is it too late? Not for the house, for you and me." I studied his face. He looked older than he should, not from years, but from choices. I don't know, I said honestly. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's earned, slow, like planting a tree and waiting for it to bloom. You don't just get the fruit because you said sorry. He nodded, silent. I softened just slightly. But you came back without her. That's something. He swallowed hard. You don't owe me anything. No, I said. I don't. But I still love you. That part, it doesn't disappear. It just goes quiet when it's been ignored too long. He looked like he might cry, but he didn't. He just said, I'm going to try. I don't want to be that man. I believed him, partly, not fully, not yet, but maybe that was enough to start. He turned to go, then stopped. So, what happens to the house now? I smiled faintly. It outlives all of us, and maybe that's the best ending it could have had. I watched him leave, slower than he came, like every step was heavy with what he should have done differently. When I walked back inside, the quiet was different. It wasn't the kind that aches. It was the kind that heals. I sat by the window with my tea, looking out at the same orchard where I'd once watched my son ride his bike in crooked circles. The same field Walter used to mow in the summers, with sweat on his brow and dirt on his boots. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the peace that comes when you know you weren't the one who let go. They were. And now, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose peace over family expectations? Have you ever been written off by someone you gave your whole heart to, only to rise in silence stronger?